And now, marine weather around Alaska.
All right, tonight's weather showing next storm system here, low pressure way out over the western Bering Sea, but the front pushing eastward, bringing another round of heavy rains, moderate to heavy rains into the southwest interior, pushing northward there into the lower Yukon River Valley and possibly into the Kuskokwim Valley as well. Dry to the east, still some rain with that system moving off to the northeast there, covering the eastern Arctic coast and down into the upper Yukon Valley, changing to showers later tonight there. And this week's system bringing a chance of rain maybe to the eastern North Gulf Coast, otherwise the Panhandle staying dry. And then for tomorrow, whatever is left of that just dissipates and moves on through late tonight, and by tomorrow, another partly to mostly sunny afternoon for the southeast coast. Same thing for the Copper River Basin. Rain pushing right up to the western Alaska Range with this system, and gusty southwest winds again in advance of the front here, with rain pushing up to the southern slopes of the western Brooks Range and sort of linking up with the leftover moisture. It's pulling off into the Mackenzie River Bay and Delta area there. So kind of a cloudy chance of showers tomorrow for the upper Yukon Valley, but some partial clearing for the North Slope and on out to the Arctic coast. Low pressure over the west central Bering Sea. Strongest winds will be north of the Aleutians, but still close enough to bring some pretty gusty west and southwest winds in that area. And for the outlook on Sunday, that low tracks up to the Seward Peninsula. Front drags eastward here, bringing a chance of rain back in across south central Alaska, the Kenai Peninsula area down to Kodiak Island. Northward through the central interior. Stays pretty dry there for the upper Tanana Valley 40-mile country areas, actually from about, say, Old Crow, right on down into the North Gulf Coast. Rain, though, to the west, all the way up to the Arctic coast there, and improving here. Not too bad out over the Bering Sea and the Aleutians. Pribilof Islands could see some clearing, as well as the Alaska Peninsula, eastern Aleutian areas, with even pretty light winds for the western central Aleutians in store for the day on Sunday here, as you can see, with a very slack gradient. Mostly sunny skies there for the southeast coast. And for the coastal water forecast, northwest winds 15 to 20 knots there for the south coast of the Panhandle, southeast to east at 10 knots, become east-northeast at 10 knots for the north coast. Lynn Canal, south winds 10 knots, Stevens Passage northwest at 10, and Clarence Strait, northwest winds 15 knots. And for the day on Sunday, north to northwest winds 15 knots for the south coast of the Panhandle, central and north coast here, west to northwest winds 10 to 15 knots. Pretty light winds there for Lynn Canal on Sunday. Pretty light winds also for Stevens Passage, and Clarence Strait looking at a northwest wind at about 10 knots. For the North Gulf Coast and Prince William Sound, Saturday, light variable winds in the forecast for those areas with seas running 2 to 4 feet. Barren Islands, southeast winds at 20 knots with 4-foot seas. Small craft advisories for Kemishak Bay, southeast at 30 knots. Small craft advisories for Cook Inlet, south to southwest winds 25 knots with 6-foot seas. And for the outlook on Sunday, Cook Inlet, small craft advisories continue. South winds 25 to 30 knots with 30-knot winds all the way down to the Kuskokwim Bay. Southeast 30 for the Barren Islands. Light variable winds for Prince William Sound and the North Gulf Coast right through the weekend. And for Kodiak Island, southwest winds 25 knots. Bristol Bay, southeast at 25. In the Alaska Peninsula, south winds 30 to 35 knots with possible higher gusts. And then for Sunday, west to southwest winds 25 to 30 knots there for the Alaska Peninsula. Southwest 30 knots for Bristol Bay. South winds at 30 knots for Kodiak Island with 7 to 8-foot seas. And for the eastern Aleutians on Saturday, south to southwest winds 25 to 30 knots with some higher gusts. Southwest 30 knots for Adak and Atka. And the western Aleutians, west becoming northwest winds at 30 knots. Outlook for Sunday, lighter winds out here over the western Aleutians. South to southwest at 15 to 20 knots. Southwest at around 20 knots here for Adak and Atka. And the eastern Aleutians, that'll be the windiest area with west and northwest winds at 20 to 30 knots. For the southwest coast on Saturday, south winds 25 to 30 knots, south at 25 for St. Lawrence Island. Norton Sound, though, east winds at 30 knots tomorrow with seas at about 6 feet. Pribilof Islands, St. Matthew Island, south winds 25 knots, seas 12 to 14 feet. And then for the day on Sunday, Pribilof, St. Matthew Island, west winds 30 knots with seas 11 to 14 feet. Gale warnings here for the Kuskokwim Delta coastline, southwest at 35 knots and the seas 9 feet. Yukon Delta coast south at 30 knots with 6-foot seas. St. Lawrence Island and Norton Sound, small craft advisories, south winds 25 knots. Eastern Beaufort Sea coast tomorrow, west winds 20 to 30 knots. Central coast, west at 15. And the western coast, same thing, west winds 15 knots. And the Chukchi Sea, east winds 15 to 20 knots. And then for the day on Sunday, eastern Beaufort Sea coastline, looking at east winds at about 20 knots, 4 to 5-foot seas. Small craft advisories on the central Arctic coast there with east winds at 25 knots. And northeast winds 25 to 30 knots to the western Arctic coast. Otherwise, the Chukchi Sea, either south or east winds at about 15 knots.